Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Lahore with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's in Syria, where Israeli airstrikes killed 23 people and wound 4 others. The Israeli army confirmed it carried out attacks on targets linked with Iran and the Syrian military. The strikes were in response to 4 rockets fired at Israel yesterday. Syria said it shot down most of the missiles before they could hit their targets. State media said the missiles were fired by Israeli jets from above the Golan Heights and Marj al-Ayun. Since the beginning of the Syrian war, Israel has carried out hundreds of airstrikes on the country in what it says are Iranian and Hezbollah targets. Well, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Turkey assures Moscow it's not planning a new military operation inside Syria. Lavrov said the withdrawal of Kurdish fighters from northern Syria is nearly complete. Earlier this week, Turkey threatened to launch military operations in northeast Syria if the area was not cleared of Kurdish fighters.
The withdrawal of Kurdish militant armed detachments has taken place. If there are still small unfinished areas where forces have not yet withdrawn, then that's only natural and the work will be completed.
In northern Iraq, 10 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party have been killed in Turkish airstrikes during a counter-terrorist operation. In a statement, Turkey's National Defense Ministry said it carried out the military operations in the Haftanin region. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapons caches and terrorist shelters. It said close to 400 Kurdish militants were killed in northern Iraq in the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of over 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign inside Turkey. The Iranian government has dismissed an Amnesty International report of over 100 deaths occurring during nationwide protests over fuel prices. However, officials confirmed 5 deaths, including 3 soldiers. President Hassan Rouhani says Iranians have defeated a foreign conspiracy behind the wave of violent street protests. Earlier, Amnesty International said 106 people are believed to have been killed during nationwide protests. Amnesty said its numbers are based on witness reports, verified videos, and information from human rights activists. Meanwhile, Iranian state media reports thousands have held pro-government rallies against rioting and vandalism in Tehran. In Afghanistan, 14 Afghan soldiers have been killed and 9 others wounded in an attack by the Taliban in Kunduz province. Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said fighters attacked a military base in the area and said the Taliban seized weapons and military equipment. Local media confirmed the attack, but the Ministry of Defense have not commented about the ambush yet. Earlier, 2 US soldiers were killed in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. The Pentagon says the cause of the incident is still being investigated. Well, Turkey's Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu has called for an end to the lockdown in occupied Kashmir that's affecting 8 million people. He was speaking at a conference in Istanbul and said the Kashmir issue should be resolved through dialogue. Azad Kashmir's President Sardar Masood Khan was at the event and urged the world to intervene in the valley. Khan said an Indo-Pak conflict could escalate into nuclear war with unimaginable consequences. The conference urged India to restore normalcy in occupied Kashmir by ending human rights abuses. It also recommended international rights watchdogs to monitor the situation in the occupied valley. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has called on the world to support the oppressed children of Indian occupied Kashmir. As the world commemorates Universal Children's Day, Khan reiterated Pakistan's commitment to the protection of children's rights. In a series of tweets, he said the children of Indian-occupied Kashmir should be remembered on this day. The Prime Minister said the international community must urge India to abide by its obligations under the Convention on the Rights of Child. Khan said Pakistan is pursuing policies and programs at entry level to ensure equality of opportunity for children. The Buddhist delegation visiting Pakistan has met Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and President Arif Alvi and discussed interfaith harmony. The 30-member delegation from South Korea arrived in Pakistan on a week-long visit on the 16th of November. During the meeting, Khan said the Buddhist delegation's visit would convey a message of peace and harmony. The delegation thanked the Prime Minister for promoting interfaith harmony. President Arif Alvi said Pakistan is proud of its Buddhist heritage, which has been carefully preserved. The delegation expressed a desire to work with Islamabad to promote Pakistan's Buddhist heritage in the Republic of Korea. Sri Lanka's new president Gotabaya Rajapaksa has named his elder brother Mahinda Rajapaksa as the country's prime minister. Mahinda served as the president of the island nation from 2005 to 2015. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe announced his resignation after being defeated in the presidential polls. A government spokesman said Mahinda will assume the country's premiership after incumbent PM Ranil Wickremesinghe formally steps down on Thursday. Former wartime Defence Minister Rajapaksa won the presidency by a significant margin in Saturday's vote. The two brothers are credited with brutally crushing the Tamil Tigers a decade ago to end Sri Lanka's civil war. Now, China has threatened to retaliate if US President Donald Trump signs the Hong Kong Rights and Democracy Act into law. Earlier, the US Senate passed legislation aimed at protecting human rights in Hong Kong amid ongoing pro-democracy tests. In a unanimous vote, the US Senate passed a second bill to ban the export of certain munitions to Hong Kong police. China's foreign ministry responded with spokesperson Geng Shuang accusing the US of interfering in China's internal affairs. Shuang said Washington is neglecting facts and applying double standards. Beijing pledged to employ strong countermeasures to safeguard its sovereignty and security. Well, for more on this story, we're joined by our correspondent in Hong Kong, Patrick Falk. Patrick, thank you for joining us on Indus News. So, Beijing said it will retaliate, but what does that exactly mean?
Well, that's not entirely clear at this point, but one of the other things that Geng Shuang said was that this goes against international law, so you wonder whether or not China might take this to some sort of international court. It's not clear what exactly that would achieve, though, because the Hong Kong Policy Act, remember, is something that was granted by the US, so presumably it is also Washington's prerogative to take these special trade and economic privileges that Hong Kong enjoys away. But all this talk of retaliation is probably a little bit too early at this point. Remember, this bill still needs to be sent back from the Senate to Congress for it to be reconciled, and then afterwards it still needs to be sent to Donald Trump to see whether or not he's prepared to sign it into law. The other thing that China may do, there was a sort of suggestion, a thinly veiled threat, if you like, when the Hong Kong government opposed the move by the US. It said that there were 85,000 US citizens living in Hong Kong and more than 1,300 businesses here. So when we talk about retaliation, there is a possibility, I suppose, that Hong Kong might make it more difficult for American businesses to operate in this city.
Patrick, we know the two countries are already struggling to reach an agreement over their trade war. Do you think this policy that they're trying to push through the Senate will outcome the trade war and affect trade negotiations?
Well, it certainly doesn't improve the situation, but, you know, matters were already bad with Donald Trump over the last few weeks. First of all, saying that no deal had been agreed upon to remove or roll back tariffs, and then saying that if a deal isn't done, that the US could impose further tariffs on Chinese imports. But, you know, the question really is whether or not the US is likely to use Hong Kong as a bargaining chip in its negotiations with China, and if it does, that is something that China will no doubt not take too lightly. And this is something that China is taking very seriously. It did summon a senior US diplomat to discuss this matter, so it certainly doesn't want the US to go down this road, and we can see by its actions already that it feels very, very strongly indeed about this.
Well, Patrick, you say China's taking this very seriously. How far will it influence China's handling of Hong Kong?
It's a good question because, to an extent, what's happened here may be seen as an embarrassment by Beijing. How it reacts isn't entirely clear. Beijing may be further angered by what's going on. And as we've seen and we've said over the past several weeks, there is very little room for compromise between the two sides. And there is an important date on the horizon. We've got the district council elections taking place or slated to take place on Sunday here in Hong Kong. And already government officials in Hong Kong are suggesting that with some of the violence that we've seen over the last few days, that there is a possibility or reduces the chances of the elections going ahead. And the government here has already set conditions, if you like, for those elections to go ahead. It said that there can't be any violence, there can't be any vandalism, and there can't be any roadblocks. And it essentially wants a peaceful situation for that important vote to take place this Sunday.
Patrick, thank you. That was our correspondent in Hong Kong, Patrick Falk. Well, staying with the trade war between the United States and China, US President Donald Trump has threatened to impose higher tariffs on Chinese goods if Beijing doesn't agree to a trade deal. Trump made the remarks during a cabinet meeting in Washington. A spokesperson for the US Trade Representative says negotiators from both sides happen on a daily basis. The US and China have agreed to a Phase 1 trade deal in October, but Beijing and Washington have since sent mixed signals about how they'll move forward. The US and China have been in a trade war now for the last 2 years. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break, so do stay with us. Hello again, it's good to have you back. Now, China and Saudi Arabia have begun a 3-week joint naval exercise. The drills are being held at a Saudi naval base. China's state media says the joint drills are designed to build trust between the two sides to combat terrorism and piracy. The joint exercise comes amid tensions in the Gulf with attacks on oil tankers and Saudi Arabia's oil plants. Now, the US has announced it will provide Vietnam with another Coast Guard ship. The move will boost Hanoi's ability to patrol the South China Sea amid tensions with China. By providing the ships, the US hopes to enable Vietnam to assert its authority and deter China. More in this report.
As if relations between Washington and Beijing aren't being tested enough by the protests in Hong Kong and their trade war, the Pentagon's decision to bolster Vietnam's fleet could deepen the growing chasm between US and China still further. Pentagon Chief Mark Esper announced the US would provide Vietnam with a new ship during his one-day visit to the country. Speaking in Hanoi, Esper hit out against Beijing, accusing it of unilaterally asserting illegitimate maritime claims. This comes after China told Vietnam not to complicate the South China Sea issue.
The core of the South China Sea issue is a territorial one caused by Vietnam and other countries directly involved in invading and occupying relevant islands of China's Nasha Islands. We hope Vietnam faces up to historical reality and abides by the high-level consensus reached by both countries, upholds the resolution of the dispute by dialogue and consultations, and avoids taking action that may complicate the issue and disturb the broader picture of peace and stability in the South China Sea and bilateral relations.
US Defense Secretary Mark Esper also met his Vietnamese counterpart Ngo Xuan Lek. Ties strengthening talks between the delegations ensued between both the delegations. This is Esper's final stop in his 6-day trip to Asia.
In Zimbabwe, police used tear gas and batons to disperse supporters of the Movement for Democratic Change. That's the country's main opposition party. This comes after the MDC accused President Emmerson Mnangagwa of employing the same heavy-handed tactics as his predecessor, Robert Mugabe. MDC supporters had gathered at party headquarters to listen to a speech by their leader, Nelson Chamisa. They said police entered the building shortly after Chamisa's arrival, firing tear gas and beating people with batons. This created a stampede in the MDC headquarters. Party officials said the skirmishes showed that the opposition party was a victim of government brutality. The Zimbabwean police have not yet commented on the development. In Israel, kingmaker Avigdor Lieberman has refused to back either Benjamin Netanyahu or his rival Benny Gantz for prime minister. Israel descended into political stalemate after September's election in which no party secured the majority in the parliament. Lieberman said Netanyahu and Gantz have failed to convince him of their worthiness to be prime minister ahead of a midnight deadline for Gantz to form a government. The two need Lieberman's 8 seats to break the impasse. Lieberman said the country is heading towards new elections. Gantz has until midnight Wednesday to forge an alliance to form the government. Now in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn held their first televised debate. The two clashed on issues ranging from Brexit to the National Health Service. A third of the British public tuned in, a substantial increase on the 27th general election. More in this report.
Johnson said he would end national misery and accused Labour of offering only division and deadlock. Corbyn said he would negotiate a new deal with the European Union and then put it to a public vote.
Briefly, I've made the position clear. We will have a referendum, we will have negotiation, and we will abide by that result.
The two leaders also argued over the National Health Service, the future of Scotland, and the monarchy. Earlier, the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party lost a court action against the broadcaster ITV to force it to include their leaders in the debate.
Look,
Thank you very much.
Bit of a fiery debate there. Now, Greece says it will close the controversial Moira migrants camp on Lesbos Island and create closed facilities for migrants. The move's aimed at tackling severe overcrowding and criticism over conditions. Moria camp is the most problematic, with over 15,000 migrants in a facility designed for only 3,000 people. Deputy Defence Minister Alkaviadis Stefanis said other island camps would also be shut down and replaced with closed centres. Greece is facing the biggest resurgence in refugees since 2015. Hundreds of migrants have been arriving on an almost daily basis by sea since the summer. Now in London, the British Museum is about to open its latest blockbuster show, consisting of 300 objects from the legendary city of Troy. The exhibition in a special gallery starts from the November 21st. Let's take a look at the city story.
Did Helen of Troy's face really launch 1,000 ships? Was Achilles' one weakness his heel? And most importantly, was there ever a Trojan horse? The British Museum separates reality from myth in this truly gargantuan exhibition. Pots, silver containers, bronze weaponry, statues and sarcophagi are among the items that are on show. The exhibition's curator, Leslie Fitton, underlined the mistake Heinrich Schliemann made when he smuggled artifacts from Troy to Greece.
He excavated Troy, and when he found the rich collection of material that he called Priam's treasure, there's no doubt that he acted wrongly in taking that material secretly from Troy to Athens at first. He knew that he was behaving badly. His excavation permissions did not allow him to do that.
The objects were in Athens, but Schliemann later donated them to the Berlin Museum, along with gold pieces such as Helen's jewelry and the treasure of Priam. Most of the items in the exhibition have been loaned from the Berlin Museum, Britain's Ashmolean Museum, and the Danish National Museum.
So there are layers of quite complex ethical questions here about where this material should be. I don't really want to comment on the complexities of that. It's almost too difficult to unpick and untangle.
The exhibition will remain open until March 8, 2020.
Well, it seems it's all going off in London. We've got elections, we've got British museums, and now we've got Britain's Kew Gardens, which is hosting its annual laser and light show to bring in the Christmas season. The show is among the best of London's Christmas lights, turning the gardens into a festive, enchanted woodland. More in this report.
As twilight falls, the magic begins. The holly bushes sing and the tunnel of light twinkles with thousands of pea lights. Christmas at London's Kew Garden boasts a dazzling arch that leads to a cascade of glowing silvery shards of the treetop walkway.
We've also taken in our treetop walkway. We have a waterfall over there, 18 metres high of a waterfall of light falling from floor to ceiling with a sea of light at your feet. So brand new shows this year, new installations, and as I say, new areas of the garden.
The glittering Cathedral of Light is a hot selfie spot for visitors. Head of Event Operations, Dairy Basra, hopes people would take away a wonderful warm Christmas feeling.
I think people are going to take their own thing from it, but we leave them with a finale on the Palm House, which is a beautiful, beautiful show, and just give you that lovely warm Christmas feeling.
Christmas at Kew will run until January 5th, 2020.
What a nice show. Now we'll be back with our show right after this short break. Hello again, it's good to have you back. Now, Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba has raised nearly $13 billion in a landmark listing in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. It's the largest sale of shares in the city in 9 years and creates a world record for a cross-border secondary share sale. Alibaba's deal is seen as a boost to Hong Kong following anti-government protests and the recent economic recession. In a statement, the company said it priced the shares at over $20 each. Alibaba's deal comes amid a late-year rush of share sales, with Saudi Arabia's state oil giant Aramco revving up to price an initial public offering. The firm's shares are already traded in New York. Well, China has lowered its lending rate for the second time this week in an effort to boost the economy in the face of the ongoing trade war with the US. This follows the first cut in a short-term market rate in 4 years. The People's Bank of China slashed its 1-year and 5-year loan rates by 5 points. Central Bank Governor Yi Gang says Beijing will increase credit support and lower real lending rates. Asian stock markets traded lower today after the US threatened to raise tariffs on Chinese goods if a trade deal is not agreed. Now to the stock markets, and US markets are trading lower at the open following escalating political tensions between Washington and Beijing. With fears of the US and China failing to reach a trade agreement, the Dow Jones average has dropped 0.2%. S&P, Standard & Poor, that's the indices, and the Nasdaq Composite have also dipped fractionally. Traders are also keeping an eye on the impeachment proceedings on President Donald Trump in Washington. Meanwhile, oil prices turned positive despite concerns over global economic growth. In Europe, stock markets also declined after President Donald Trump threatened to raise tariffs on Chinese goods. Well, it's 19 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's the news, and that's all from me and the team here in Lahore. But for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.